Great. So, want to welcome everyone and thank you for coming. Really, I'm glad to see so many people. We actually had 45 people register, but many of them did say they would not be able to make this first meeting. Uh, Before we get started, could I ask you to please post in the chat your town and any organizational affiliations you have. Maybe not all of them, but at least the most prominent ones to this, more important to this. And then if you look in the chat, there'll be a link to a poll that will help us decide when the next meeting and meetings should be scheduled. So if you could fill that out, appreciate it. So we're here because of a shared recognition that we have to decarbonize the way we heat and cool buildings. It's a big problem because buildings account for such a large proportion of greenhouse gas emissions, somewhere between, 30 and 35%, roughly speaking. Luckily, there's a big solution. Air source heat pumps are great, and they're way more efficient than any furnace or boiler. But even better than those are ground source heat pumps. And even more efficient than ground source heat pumps are thermal energy networks. Individual buildings linked together by a shared thermal loop, with each building having their own heat pump or heat pumps linking into that shared loop. And that added efficiency is really important, partly to reduce the cost of operating the system, but also so that thermal energy loops have the least amount of impact on the grid's infrastructure, which is an important cost issue. Today we're going to let's go move on to here. Oops. Today we're going to hear from Bernie Pelletier, who many of you know from PACE, and he's just going to do a quick level setting exercise in what thermal energy networks are. By the way, if your mic on, could you please mute it? Great. Then we're going to hear from Stephen Winter, who is the Director of Climate and Sustainability for the City of New Haven. And if that wasn't enough, he's also a state representative from New Haven. Then Lianne Allen-Jacobson, who's a scientist from the wind industry, but is also interested in community-led thermal energy networks, is going to give us a quick overview of the Massachusetts and Colorado versions of our thermal energy network grant programs, and they've been up and running for a short time. Well, actually, in Massachusetts, at least two years. Then we'd like to hear from all of you, questions and comments, and then we'll leave 5 minutes at the end for next steps. Our coming together today is largely prompted by the Thermal Energy Network Grant Program embedded in Senate Bill 4. Stephen Winter championed this program, but not without help. I'd like to recognize Susan Johnson from Wyndham, Representative Susan Johnson, who was among its strongest supporters and is really enthusiastic about this whole concept. Unfortunately, the Thermal Energy Network Grant Program was not funded, but we see real benefits to starting to develop a community of advocates in and out of town government who want to explore both the opportunities and challenges of community-led thermal energy networks. It'll increase the probability that the program actually gets funded, and we would have to do some of this community building anyways when that funding does come through. Some of our work is going to be done together, for example, in advocating for the funding of the Thermal Energy Network Grant Program. And some of our work is going to be done in small groups or as individuals within our own towns. The point of 10-4CT, Thermal Energy Networks for Connecticut, is to empower us all to become better advocates for this important tool in changing the way we heat and cool buildings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bernie and give him the next slide. Go ahead, Bernie.
Thank you, Peter. I really have hopefully I won't even need all 10 minutes, but we have a wide and diverse group, not all of whom are actually with us this evening, but we'll look at this recording. So it's useful to do some level setting, and towards that end, we're going to show two videos on the next slide.
Oh,
The first is a very basic one, and the second is an Eversource video from the Framingham pilot in Massachusetts, both of which, one, I think, just to ground us, and the second to show us what can be done. So with no further ado, Peter, if you'll stop sharing, I'll share the heat video.
okay. So you want me to stop sharing? Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
And, and let's see here. Share this. And
The Earth is soaking up energy from the sun, and it's
I'm sorry, let me do that one more time because I bet you can't hear.
We can hear, but you could do the slideshow. Can you do a full screen?
So the sound is okay?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay.
doing this for a long time. Near the surface, the ground warms and cools with the seasons, but lower down, it stays at a constant temperature. In Massachusetts, that's 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. This stored temperature is a source of renewable energy. It can be accessed to heat or cool a single building without using fossil fuels. But did you know we can also connect entire communities to that renewable source in the ground? How does it work? It starts with underground pipes in the streets, sort of like gas pipes, but filled only with water. The water absorbs the ground temperature of the earth and delivers it to buildings. Pipes connect buildings with different heating needs, so energy is never wasted. Instead, it's exchanged between buildings or stored in the ground until it's needed. Inside, a heat pump moves heat in or out according to the temperature you want. This system of pipes can connect like Lego blocks, gradually moving us all from gas to geo, giving us cleaner air, efficient heating and cooling, and a healthier planet. The idea for this networked geothermal system, run at a utility scale, originated at HEAT, a climate solutions nonprofit. When Zainab Magavi of HEAT found out how expensive it would be to install geothermal for her home, she asked, instead, could a utility provide geothermal energy for me and my neighbors for the same monthly energy bill as gas? Zainab worked with HEAT founder Audrey Schulman and the HEAT team to bring gas utilities, workers, climate advocates, legislators, regulators, and neighbors together to make this system a reality. Demonstration projects are now moving forward in Massachusetts and across the country. This technology can deliver affordable and reliable energy to our buildings. And unlike gas, it's locally sourced, safe, renewable, and can help get us to zero emissions. It's time to modernize our energy infrastructure to meet the needs of our future. The answer is right beneath our feet. Learn more at heet.org.
And I think on some level, what we're about with this meeting tonight is to make sure that we are ready. So, and this I found to be an amazing video. It's basically the Framingham geothermal grid.
Eversource's geothermal pilot project begins here in the parking lot of the Farley building. This is the location of the main bore field, which will provide about half of the overall thermal energy to the system. Located underground, this main bore field will include the boreholes, headers, valves, and all related equipment. When work is completed, a brand new parking lot will be paved on top. Also being installed at this location is a pump house, which will be situated in the northwest corner of the lot. Serving as the heart of the system, it will contain several pumps, monitoring equipment, and a supplemental boiler that will provide additional energy in the event of an emergency. It will also house some of the heat exchangers and pumping equipment for the Farley building as well. Leaving the parking lot, the mile-long route will proceed south on Rose Kennedy Lane. One key feature of the geothermal infrastructure is an 1/8-inch HTP, a type of plastic pipe, buried about 5 feet under the streets, that will be used to move a water-based fluid through the neighborhood. This section of the loop will serve 5 low-income apartment buildings, saving the Framingham Housing Authority about 75% in electric heating costs and emissions savings of 75%. At the top of Rose Kennedy, the route will continue through this hill, to the other side down Berkshire Road. The route then turns east, traveling on Prindeville Avenue. Then north up Hampshire Road. And southeast on Lindbergh, where all of the homes participating in the pilot will be insulated and weatherized as part of the conversion process. The route then continues north on Concord Street, the main throughway in this part of Framingham. Here, the geothermal loop will serve the Gulf gas station. And the Concord Street Fire Station, which will also be host to a second satellite bore field located in the rear parking lot. In addition, Eversource will help to upgrade the electric service in this critical community building. Continuing along Concord Street, the Corner Cabinet Shop, a local small business, will also be connected to the loop. Finally, the route turns westward down Normandy Road, passes a number of Framingham Housing Authority buildings, and returns back to the main bore field at the Farley Building. Strong community support and diverse buildings in the area make Framingham a perfect location for Eversource's first networked geothermal system.
I have to be honest, that's amazing to me every time I see it. And I guess,
This is Pod 5.
oops, hold on.
First, fully immersive sleep system.
On the one hand, it's a perfect example of what can be done. On the other hand, I think there are many more modest examples that I think we ought to keep in mind and contemplate with this group. So hopefully we're a little bit level-setted as to the basic idea of what network geothermal is and indeed what's possible. And Peter, we're going to turn it over to Stephen to talk through what
Yeah.
this legislation is, right?
Yes, David, we're going to keep most questions to the end, but if you have a quick one, by all means.
Do we know the total length of the loop in
It's
Framingham?
It's 1 mile in
1 mile? Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure. Stephen.
Thanks, Peter. Good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Winter. As Peter mentioned, I wear 2 hats. I'm the Executive Director for Climate and Sustainability at the City of New Haven and the state legislator, state rep, I should say, representing the 94th Assembly District, which is part of New Haven and part of Hamden. And I share the excitement Peter mentioned around the language for the grant and loan program, which was authorized but not funded in SB 4 or Public Act 25-173. So I think, like Peter mentioned, demonstrating that there's interest in establishing thermal energy networks at the community level, I think is really important in terms of pushing for that to get funded. That's really essential. And I'll talk a little bit about the 3 steps, so to speak, that could be funded in the grant program. The language is very broad. I'll also talk briefly about the project we're working on in New Haven and about what didn't make it into SB 4 or the final version of SB 4, but was in earlier versions of SB 4. So first, we were able to get an authorization within available appropriations for a grant and loan program for thermal energy networks. And the goal here is to support entities that are interested in developing thermal energy networks. And Peter shared beyond the efficiencies you get, as you saw in the video, with tapping into the heating and cooling capacity of the earth. You can also move energy between buildings. So if you have a building like, let's say, an ice rink or a data center that's constantly rejecting heat, an adjacent building can utilize that energy during the heating season to heat its space or water needs. So really exciting, and the efficiencies that come with that are part of what make these large upfront capital investments make sense in the long run. So if we look at other state grant programs, and it sounds like we'll get into that in more detail a little bit later on, but one strategy is to fund feasibility studies. And so that's the first thing that's authorized in SB4 is assistance with community planning, thermal energy network project feasibility, and cost benefit analyses. So you could imagine these as $50,000 to $100,000 grants that interested communities could get to look at where there's going to be the right collection of buildings and makeup of buildings that something like this makes sense. So you're really looking in most cases for a diversity of uses so that you can exchange energy between buildings in a complementary way, and that the loop, which needs to not freeze and also not get too hot, can maintain a stable temperature range. So the Framingham projects come up, and there are several other pilot projects that were studied in Massachusetts. One of them, I believe, was in Lowell, didn't end up moving forward because they didn't have the right density of buildings and to make that feasible. But the Framingham project, it would be really interesting to see now that the heating season's well over and they're into the cooling season, to get some information on how that system's performing. I hear it's doing really well. The second piece of the thermal energy network development process that the grant and loan program could fund would be the design and engineering associated with a thermal energy network. So with my city hat on, we were able to get a climate pollution reduction implementation grant from the EPA to fund part of the construction of a thermal energy network near the city of New Haven's main train station, Union Station, and to take that building's primary source of heating and cooling off of fossil fuels and onto the thermal energy network. And across the street from the station, there's close to 10 acres of vacant lots where the Housing Authority of New Haven plans to develop between 2,000 and 2,500 units of new housing. And so the aim is for the first phase of that, roughly 1,000 units to support the heating and cooling and domestic hot water of those new buildings and the folks who live there. So that project right now is in the design and design development process. I would say the final price tag for that will probably end up between $1 and $2 million, depending on how much assistance we need in the construction support from the design team that the city selected. So in other grant programs, you've seen in other states design and design development grants between $250,000 to $500,000, and similar grants from the Department of Energy's geothermal technologies office that were more in the $1 to $2 million range that this project is in. And since I'm mentioning EPA funded project, I should say it is still funded, and we've had funding uninterrupted since about the middle of February. The last piece that the grant and loan program could support would be the actual construction of these projects. And I think like I mentioned before, these are really capital intensive projects. And one of the things that didn't make it into SB4 was language that would authorize gas and electric utilities to include these types of investments in their rate base, either as a pilot or on a long-term basis. So if you look at the Eversource project, they're going to be able to pay for that pilot program through their gas utility rates, and that's Eversource who's doing that project. So you could imagine Eversource here in Connecticut also doing that project, and you could imagine instead of putting hundreds of millions of dollars into pipeline or I should say gas distribution network upgrades, that we would put that capital investment where it makes sense into thermal energy networks. So that didn't make it into SB4, even though it was in an earlier version. And I think that's also something I would encourage folks to keep in mind. Beyond the community-led geothermal or institutional geothermal, that we keep pushing for that authorization so that we can look at these utilities not as gas utilities, but as heating utilities and ones that can provide heat through thermal energy networks and also cooling. So I think that's important and we should keep pushing for that. But anyway, to get back to the implementation piece of this, there was with all the bad news at the federal level, it can sometimes feel difficult to wrap your head around the good things. But one good thing was that advocates on both the sides of the aisle in Congress stood up to protect tax credits for thermal energy networks and ground source heat pumps. So the tax credit structure that came into being through the Inflation Reduction Act, where if you meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, you can get a 30% of your project costs reimbursed. And that's really everything involved in the project development life cycle, from the design and legal and accounting fees all the way through the construction. And there are additional adders, like if you are in a brownfield area, that's an additional 10%, so that could get you to 40. And if you're in what's called an energy community, you can get up to 50. And if you can even stack and use domestic content, which is challenging, but you can do it to meet domestic content requirements, you can get up to 60. So the point here being that between 30 and 60%, a significant chunk, can be reimbursed by the federal government. So if we look at any of these systems, we should be thinking, well, we've got to pay for a lot of it up front, but we should be counting on a piece of it to be paid back through the federal government. And that authorization, if there aren't more changes, lasts until 2032 and then declines. I think it's phased out by 2035. So I would also encourage folks to think about this. We really have this limited window where we have Democrats and Republicans at the federal level, including President Trump, saying, look, you have the next 8 years to make a really significant investment in ground source heat pumps and geothermal systems, and the federal government will help pay for it. One other funding mechanism I should mention, I think I saw Chris Till from Manchester on the Zoom, is that we also have our school construction reimbursement program at the state level for school construction projects. And this didn't make it into SB4, but it was in 5004. Ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps are now on the list of projects that are eligible for automatic reimbursement through the school construction grant program. So that could be another way that we could look at schools potentially getting them onto geothermal. And then maybe in the long run, there's potential for them to be part of a larger network. So if you look at the New Haven project that I'm working on, the grant funds are meant to fund about 60% of the project cost, and the other 40% we're seeking to get through the federal government. It's a brownfield site plus the 30% that comes with meeting the labor requirements. So that's a whole lot, but it is a lot to say that there are several different funding sources we could be looking at to help leverage the grant and loan program funds. And again, to look at the New Haven project as an example of how that could work, the city has an authorization from its local legislature to borrow funds from the Green Bank on a short-term basis, probably 3 to 5 years, while maybe soon, well, maybe shorter than that. And while we need the funding up front for that 40%, until we can get reimbursement from the federal government. Now, the grant that we got from EPA, you could imagine a similar grant, but from this state grant program. So for our project, that is roughly $10 million, a little bit less. So you can see, depending on which pieces of the authorization you're focused on, how the numbers can certainly grow quickly. So I did a little budget of like what would a dream program look like for this, and shared it with Peter before this call. So if you had 10 feasibility grants at 100,000, 4 grants of $1 million for design, that would get you 5 million, and then another 20 million you could do $10 million implementation grants, and that would help you graduate two really large scale thermal energy networks from the feasibility through the design through the implementation process. The last thing I'll say, and this is more for folks who are in the weeds on thermal energy networks, is that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act actually did something positive for geothermal in addition to leaving it alone. And that is this issue where if you're, to use the Framingham example, the Eversource folks not only built the network, they also did retrofits in people's homes. The network, they can claim a tax credit on, since they're going to be owning and operating it. But there was an issue in the tax code where if something was on someone else's property, it would be difficult to claim the federal incentive. And that was actually resolved in the Republicans' reconciliation bill. So that's really interesting because it opens up new opportunities for an entity, whether it's the gas and electric utility or a municipal utility like the one that we're planning here in New Haven, or some third party, to build out one of these loops and then also essentially lease the improvements in someone's home on a long-term basis, in a similar way that we've seen solar leasing, starting with like Solar City and Sunrun, as a way to spread out these long-term costs. So outside of the idea of putting it into the rate structure for a gas or electric utility, that could be another model for seeing these systems proliferate.
Well, thank you, Steve. That is so exciting. Hearing about the funding structure, I'm in favor of what you're proposing. You have my vote. Um, so let's move on to Lianne, and she's going to give us a quick overview of the similar grant programs in Massachusetts and Colorado. Take it away.
Thanks, Peter. So I pulled some of the information in here. It's meant to be sort of a high level view. There will be a lot of details, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. So the two programs are, I think, fairly different. The Massachusetts program was $500,000 total, smaller projects, 50 to 100,000 per project. There were 12 early stage community projects, and the focus was really on demand driven deployment. The funding came from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and it came through Leg Up out of Heat. The Colorado Geothermal Grant Program is a little bit more mature. They're going into their third round of funding right now. And overall, the size of the pot is quite bigger every year. And the types of projects they're funding is also a bit more diverse. The size of individual projects and the number of awardees are also, larger. For Kickstart, here's a map that illustrates the location of those pilot projects. Again, they were focused on early stage exploration to reduce risk for communities. There's also an emphasis on providing guidance and tools and technical support, and encouraging community engagement. Each of these pilot projects produced a report that describes features of the community, the partners that were included and how they were engaging the community, their motivation, the site they selected, and opportunistic thermal resources that they identified as part of their project. This graphic is my attempt to find pattern in some of those pilot projects. It's just features of those projects that I latched onto, and there's some, I'm sure there are similarities here that and differences I'm not emphasizing. But the top row are all projects that included a school as part of the anchor for their loop. The second row identified a natural water resource that was within the community that could augment their thermal energy network. And then the bottom row are sort of the oddballs. I wasn't sure where to put them. They're using waste heat, so sort of different from the other ones. And actually, there was very little detail on the Acton project. Something that I think is pretty special about the Kickstart Massachusetts project is that by being part of HEAT, there are these resources that are really easy to find. And I wanted to highlight a few of them for the group. One is their geothermal toolkit, which is really a great resource where they've gathered a lot of links, a lot of information. They have their Leg Up annual meeting, and you can go there now and watch these videos from the past meeting. And it looks, I haven't watched them yet, but it looks like there's a lot of great information there. And then finally, there's this map of public interest, which is a fairly simple tool, an ArcGIS form where we could go in and express our interest for having geothermal network in our community. So you can see from this screenshot, many folks are submitting their interest in this form outside of Massachusetts. So we could build off their campaign to get a sense of where there's interest within Connecticut. In terms of Colorado, there's a lot more information in some ways here because there have been so many projects. So bear with me as I try and pull some information in here. This map is showing the awardees from round 1. And then below I've listed the 11 groups that were awarded a grant in round 2. And as I mentioned earlier, round 3 is ongoing. These projects are different in that they're considering more than just community thermal energy networks. There's single structure projects. The awardees include local governments as well as school districts, communities, medical campuses, and wastewater treatment facilities. And the applicants are, as you might imagine, much broader. So here they're including the utilities and other developers, some sort of big developers in the geothermal space were applicants for this program. So here I'm just highlighting the 3 different types of grants that were related to energy networks. So there are grants that aren't specific to thermal energy networks too within that GECGP program. So in round 1, there were 6 awards that went to groups that were in this scoping phase that Steve also identified as one place we could go in Connecticut. Here, the awards range from 35 to 100,000 in that round one. In terms of design phase projects, this is where most of the awards went for that first round. There were 10 awards here, and you can see that these awards were much larger. Some of them were smaller. The $30K award for the Girl Scouts for Tomahawk Ranch, but most of the awards exceed 200,000, and the university received an award for 500,000. And then finally, there were 4 installation projects. So again, these awards are larger, similar in size actually to the design projects, and a variety of different applicants. And then I wanted to close by highlighting a few features that stood out to me as being key differences for these programs and how we might, how that might influence a similar type of program in Connecticut. So in Massachusetts, there were fewer smaller projects. The program, I think, is younger, or at least there have been fewer projects within the Kickstart program. It really was a great resource. So it's a place we can go to learn. And then, of course, geographically, Massachusetts is much closer to Connecticut. And so I think those projects probably face similar challenges to what we might face here. For the Colorado program, as I already mentioned, these projects are much larger. I didn't state this, but there's also a match requirement. So sort of to Steve's point earlier about funding, it wasn't, I don't believe the Kickstart projects required a match of any kind. And finally, I'm sort of repeating myself here, so I'm just going to go to the bottom. While the Colorado grant program doesn't gather resources, there have been really just quite a few pilot projects at this point. So it really does lend itself to some sort of retrospective analysis to understand what we could do here.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lianne. That was a really good presentation, and it's so good that we have Massachusetts and Colorado to give us some idea of how to proceed. Now I'd like to open it up to you who are attending, either in the chat or just by the raise your hand feature. Make a comment, ask a question, and we'll try to address it.
Looks like Alicia.
Yeah, go for it, Alicia.
It's Alicia.
Yeah. I know I get it wrong often.
That's why I have put it in parentheses for people to see to sound it out. Alicia. I just want to say thank you for having this meeting today. And I'm really excited to see what we can do here in Connecticut. I'm glad we're doing stuff already in New Haven. Thank you, Rep. Winter. I look forward to seeing how this all unfolds because it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. So that just got a statement.
Thank you, Alicia. Rich.
Hi, yeah. So I guess my question has to do with getting utilities on board on Connecticut. In my experience, it seems like the utilities are quite hostile to any kind of environmental initiatives here in Connecticut. It seems like it's a bit different in Massachusetts. I'm not sure what the structural differences are between our two states that makes that the case, but I don't know if there's anybody here who might be able to speak to that.
Steve, do you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. I think there's the issue I was raising earlier about authorizing utilities to be a stakeholder and to own and operate thermal energy networks. That's something that the gas utilities and electric utilities don't currently have in statute, but it's something that Eversource certainly would like to do because they're really viewed as a leader on this with the Framingham project. So I think if we can get that legislative change made, that would be helpful. They're gung ho about this. They included it in their most recent rate case filing, even without that authorization. So I think that there's a big role for them to play, and that they see that. And then Avangrid, United Illuminating and Southern Connecticut Gas, they're also part of pilot programs in New York State, so they have some exposure to this as well. So I don't think that they're necessarily, opposed to this in any way.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Andy.
Or maybe Representative Winter, is there any chance we might be able to, for our capital area friends, to save the thermal energy network proposal for the capital area system from natural gas and have them do the right thing? Is that gone by the wayside, or is there still a chance?
That's a great question. It's something I can follow up with Department of Administrative Services about. I think that currently they don't have like funds budgeted for a thermal energy network. Currently they're budgeting under the assumption that they would replace the heating system on the capital area system with more efficient gas system. But I do think it's worth at least revisiting in light of the changes at the federal level, because they didn't know whether those would stay in place. That being said, the legislature would need to put in a lot more money, and there's some concern when I met with DAS that whatever they put in now may be a short-term solution for the capital area system, because they think that the thermal plant might be more or less consumed by the highway in Hartford if the highway ends up being rerouted there. So I think it's an uphill battle, but I can definitely revisit it. And then the other piece that they were concerned about is that it's currently a high temperature loop, and the ground source heat pump systems are lower temperature systems. So there need to be a lot of retrofitting of heating delivery systems within the buildings on the loop, some of which the state doesn't own. So maybe there's an opening there with the change in the third party ownership piece at the federal level. So I think I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't say the ship has totally sailed, but I think it's going to be challenging to get them to change direction.
Alicia has
Thanks.
been leading a Sierra Club group, which I'm a part of. And we have spent hours and hours and hours working on this, talking to DAS, critiquing their analysis. We could consume a lot of time right now on talking about the capital area system. So I'm going to skip past that, but I just want to say that Alicia has done an excellent job in leading us, and Sam has participated in that, and Mike Ungaro and David Englert and probably others on the call that I'm forgetting about. But it's a great question, and we actually received. I just saw an email that Alicia sent on a response to a letter a few weeks ago from us, from DAS, and looking forward to reading it after this meeting. So, Mike.
Yes, thanks. A couple things. One, to go back to the issue of Eversource and the utilities becoming more involved or on some pilot projects in Connecticut, and the comparison to Massachusetts, where Eversource is, obviously going forward with that Framingham project. I was on a Save the Sound call last night, and one of the issues that was raised was the current hostility between Pura and the utilities, and that being a roadblock to the utilities working on these projects in Connecticut versus that they're working on them in Massachusetts, where they have a better relationship. And I guess one question is that actually a problem, a factor, or and two, my thought was, well, maybe this is a way to partially repair that relationship for them to get the authorization and the funding needed for pilot projects here. Maybe that's a way to actually repair the relationship. What do you all think of that? And then I had a question about retrofitting costs too.
Mike, I agree with what you're saying, and I think it's a good observation about the, it's an opportunity perhaps to repair and to work together. Steve, do you have anything, or anybody else? Sam, do you have anything else that you'd like to respond to about that?
Oh, I just threw it in the chat that Eversource did propose a thermal energy network in the gas rate case that is currently underway. They propose it for new construction. They have experience with Eversource. I also noted in the chat they've, talked a lot about it in the public hearing on thermal energy networks. So I think the resistance in the legislature was about putting new paying for a thermal energy network through the system benefit charge, which is so much under fire. So I think we're up against that probably more than the utilities themselves.
I think that's right, and I would add, you could bond for something like this, to try to get around the concern of paying for it through public benefits, and this is something like securitization that the utility or Eversource, I should say, consistently advocated for during the public hearing process. So there are ways that they can work together with the regulators on the things that they're really motivated. And then on the retrofit piece, my understanding is that the Framingham project was roughly 1/3 drilling boreholes, 1/3 pumping and other equipment to circulate fluid through the network. And then since they were also doing retrofits, about 1/3 retrofits. So if you're Eversource proposing to do it in new construction, you've learned, you can design those systems from the get-go. So there's a lot less complexity there, and eliminate one of the, big cost drivers of the project in Framingham.
Yeah, Steve, thanks for that. And yeah, that was going to be my next question, because on that same call last night, it was observed, and I don't know this myself, I haven't researched it myself, that because of those high retrofit costs that they experienced on the Framingham project, in Massachusetts going forward, Eversource or maybe others are looking at focusing on new construction rather than retrofitting older buildings. And so, one, I don't know if that's accurate, but two, is that going to be a hurdle here in Connecticut going forward with projects that involves older buildings and the need to retrofit? Or is that, and I think, Steve, you mentioned that we didn't get funding for retrofitting now, but we may need to, make sure we, that's a part of the funding we get is for retrofitting, because we obviously have a lot of old buildings in Connecticut, and we need to be able to have geothermal networks in our older neighborhoods as well.
Part of the Framingham project is going to be the evaluation done by third party, I think in conjunction with HEAT. And I think a lot of what we're going to find out about costs and business model and regulatory environment is going to come from that evaluation, which will only come at the end of 2 full heating systems, which I think we've completed, or they've completed, but more on that later. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to Jeff. Thanks, Mike.
Hi, thanks. Just one quick note on the Framingham project. The retrofit business model was sort of a Cadillac version. They paid. My understanding is that Eversource and therefore the Massachusetts gas ratepayers are paying for the entirety of the retrofit costs. The property owners have no skin in the game there. That's probably not a viable model for TENS going forward. There may be clearly a need for retrofit funds through the utility, through the gas, through the ratepayers in a utility project for low income properties. But you really should expect, I think, middle class and upper class and commercial enterprises to have financial skin in the game for TENS projects in the future. My question is for Stephen. What were the politics surrounding the no funding? Was it simply was it ever actually discussed, this grant program? In other words, was there political wrangling around whether to fund this specific program, or did it not really get that kind of discussion in the budgeting conversation? I'm trying to understand what the prospect for future funding for the grant program might be in terms of, or in light of the politics in the first go round.
I think that the larger conversation at the legislature on energy this session was almost entirely about affordability, and there are very few things that might even be perceived to incrementally increase costs that made it into the final version of SB4. So like if you look at the things that the state's now going to bond for, like bonding for arrearages, like unpaid bills, or bonding for electric vehicle charging, the theory there was, okay, well, if we take this off of the public benefits part of the bill, that gives people some rate relief. So I think that the two ways that you could look at bonding for or paying for something like this would be through bonding or through public benefits. In SB4, the language was around rate recovery. And I think that, if the political goal for a lot of people was, hey, how can we trim what's in the public benefits, then that was sort of a dead end. And then I think there wasn't appetite for adding this as a new bonding request, given that like the focus for the bonding was taking things off of public benefits. So I think a lot of it had to do with a really defensive posture that folks took around clean energy this year. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes, thanks.
Eric.
I love the idea of taking full advantage of the federal incentives that are there for geothermal right now, and the steps that SB4 take in starting to get us in that direction, and thinking about the next step of building knowledge and a network of advocates for this in the state. I think there's great potential in leveraging schools, because they're at this nexus. They could be anchors in the systems themselves, plus they get the added incentives. Are there already any schools that are speaking out about this that we could use to talk to other schools? Are there any efforts already to educate schools about all this?
Well, I'll just say that there are some schools that have geothermal systems already. It seems like the Department of Administrative Services, which I believe oversees the school grant programs, is well on board for thermal energy network, or not thermal energy, for ground source heat pump systems. Beyond that, I don't have anything specific to say. Steve or anyone have any more to light to shed on that?
Yeah, I think there's some districts have been, I think, I want to say Montville, it's one of the districts out in southeastern Connecticut. All their schools are geothermal. And I know Manchester's done work with net zero schools that rely on geothermal in part, and Stanford is working now on new construction that I think is entirely geothermal. So there's definitely activity with public school construction.
Yeah, and hopefully those can be the perhaps anchors for networks that go beyond the actual school site itself, but that's something we're going to have to explore. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to just a few minutes on next steps. First of all, you will all registrants will receive an invitation to join a 10-4 CCT Google group. So we'll have the opportunity to speak to each other online, and I hope that you'll take advantage of that. Our PACE's program administrator, Deb Rowe, has already started a web page, one web page for as part of the PACE website, and there'll be more resources there. Let's see here. Future meetings, which we hope to do monthly. We'll have a number of speakers. I mean, I have a list already. I think that somebody from HEAT, perhaps Zainab, will be wanting to talk about Kickstart. Perhaps we can get somebody from Colorado, Chris Till from Manchester, who is on this call. We'd like to hear from his project, which is a geothermal library, which he has some intention or aspirations to branch out up and down Manchester's Main Street. Jeff Howard was very much involved with the Wallingford geothermal project, which unfortunately got canceled, but I think that there are insights to learn there. I think we should hear more detail about the New Haven project. Steve or somebody else from that team can do that. So Julie Paquette from Yale, I think would be interesting to hear about that. And there are a few more, so I won't list them all, but that's where I see next going. I hope you'll reach out to other people who you think might be interested in this. 40, I think close to 50 people signed up for this. And then because of it being summer and just the way that webinars and meetings work, 30, I'm not going to say just 30, it's a pretty impressive number. So I think we have something going here and we want to continue it. If you have any interest in lending more time to this effort, let me know, because I'm sure we can find some other projects within this effort. I'll just close by saying that I don't want to minimize the challenges of developing thermal energy networks in Connecticut, but it's a pretty well understood technology. What we need to do is familiarize ourselves with the still developing business models and regulatory frameworks that will make the widespread adoption of thermal energy networks possible. And then we need to bring what we've learned back to our town governments. I think that I'm going to say when the grant program is funded, that will also get the attention of town government officials, town officials. So with that, I'm going to end it. And thank you again for registering, showing up, and your comments and questions, and to be continued.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.